Buongiorno, nella quinta intervista di Hustling for Peace, lottare per la pace, lutter pour la paix, chiassotv in collaborazione col Comitato degli scrittori per la pace del PEN International, ha il piacere e l'onore di avere qui con noi a rispondere sulla situazione dei diritti degli scrittori, della libertà degli scrittori, dei giornalisti e sulla situazione del suo complesso in Ucraina, il famoso scrittore internazionale Andriy Kurkov, che scrive in russo, ma è un convinto ucraino, è uno scrittore ucraino, che è anche presidente, anche e soprattutto in questo caso, presidente del centro PEN ucraino dal 2018 fino a oggi, è sempre in carica. L'intervista sarà come sempre in inglese. Hello, Mr. Kurkov, thank you. You are a
Hello.
famous writer, also a filmmaker, I think, in Ukraine. You are also the president of the PEN Center, Ukrainian PEN Center, from 2018 till now. And we are here in our program, Hustling for Peace, to ask you how is the situation, this also a little bit dramatic situation in Ukraine now, regarding the freedom of speech, regarding the freedom of journalists, and all this situation also with Russia, and what the PEN Center can make and makes in this situation about this.
Well, you asked at once about 10 questions, so I cannot be very concrete, but first I will talk about situation in Ukraine. Actually, I mean, life looks normal in the streets. There is no panic. Nobody's rushing to the shops to buy food stocks, or nobody's rushing to banks to change money or to take money from their account. But of course, everybody is watching and checking on the news, and the news is changing. Situation in geopolitics is changing every hour. And on Saturday, 13th of February, we had many private flights from Kyiv with oligarchs and rich people living in Ukraine for foreign countries. But normal people are staying, and many of normal people are joining territorial defenses in case of the all-out war with Russia. The freedom of speech and freedom of press were always very cherished and even overused in Ukraine. We are the country with more than 370 political parties, which means that everyone has his own opinion, and everyone can find a website or a newspaper which corresponds to his ideas or his understanding of the politics and the world situation. PEN Ukraine does a lot of projects which are aimed at defense of the freedom of speech and freedom of press. And we do a lot also to help civil journalists in Crimea who are Crimean Tatars imprisoned by Russian authorities. I'm in correspondence with Nariman Jalal, who is an ex-politician, actually not ex, but real Crimean Tatar politician and a journalist who is now awaiting trial in Simferopol, being accused of terroristic activities. We have some situations with the TV channels which were transmitting Russian propaganda, and these 4, I think, TV channels were either closed down or their broadcasting was stopped by the Security Council of Ukraine because of the situation with Russia, and because they were directly passing the messages, practically Russian messages, to the audience. The last TV channel which was closed for temporarily is called Nash, our TV channel, and the politician who is the owner of this TV channel is fighting legally back to get it on air again. His name is Yevgeny Muraev. But I don't think this is a question of freedom of press. This is a question actually of security of the country. And there is a commission, special commission, which decides on the all the TV and radio broadcasting consisted of journalists and public figures who are supposed to take decisions also regarding the quality and honesty of the TV channels and radio stations. So we are keeping an eye on this situation also, but we are more involved in the public discussions to instigate, to teach people, Ukrainians, how to have open public discussions about anything from cultural to political issues. And on the mission like this, I went recently to Poltava region, which is more close to Russian border, to a big village, Kozelshina, where once a month Ukrainian Pen Center organizes a lecture and a public discussion with the local activists. So, I mean, my lecture, I was asked to talk about regional and national elites and the importance and the role of the elites in Ukraine. And obviously, I was asked to talk about this because local people, they don't trust Ukrainian national elite, and they want new faces and they want local elite to be promoted or upgraded to the national level. This is a typical situation for Ukraine, because in Ukraine, people don't trust politicians, and any news connected with political and economical corruption creates even more mistrust between the official elite and the citizens of the country. So life is as usual. We have today protests of students in front of the Cabinet of Ministers, and they are demanding the resignation of the Minister of Education. And we have regular protests of small entrepreneurs. And at the same time, of course, the country is preparing for possible war. This is in brief what is happening in Ukraine now.
But as a Pen Center of Ukraine, you have, I think, a solidarity program with those journalists imprisoned in Crimea, yes? Or
yes,
no?
Yes. We are in touch with them. Recently, we had a visit of the wives of the imprisoned journalists. They came from Crimea for several days to Kiev, and we had a meeting with them in the headquarters of Ukrainian Pen Center.
Yes, and yes, okay. What can you said to me about this so-called hybrid war between Russia and Ukraine? It's so-called hybrid war from 2014 also, yes.
Well, the real war is continuing all these years because the front line is 430 kilometers long. So, I mean, the front line in Donbass is huge, and every day there are people who are wounded there. There is artillery exchanges, etc. So, I mean, this is not hybrid, this is a real war. The hybrid war is fought with disinformation, with fakes, with fake news, with hackers attacks, with imprisonments of people who are innocent and on Russian territory. The Ukrainian citizens quite often are detained and accused of being spies or terrorists. And there are approximately 130 political prisoners from Ukraine in Russian prisons. So the way Russia is using justice is also a part of this hybrid war.
Yes, sure. But you have another program about Soviet memory that is a little bit changing under Putin. Yes, they changed their memory. And I think that you, as Ukrainian Pen, are concerned about this, yes?
Every year we have a special topic, and active members of PEN are writing and publishing essays on this topic. Mm-hmm. So, in fact, this year's topic is connected with the history, what we shouldn't forget. And this is very important because the history is not very well taught in Ukraine, unfortunately. The professors have their favorite topics and they are not very favorite topics. And so we have to share the knowledge which can be otherwise lost. And it's not only about the fight of Ukrainians for their independence. It's not only about artificial famine organized by Stalin and communists in 1932-33 and then in 1947. But it is also about history of anti-Semitism in Ukrainian territory before 1917 and after the war, Second World War. It's about the whole generation of Ukrainian poets and writers who were shot dead. They were accused of being spies or nationalists. And so Ukraine lost hundreds of its artists. And actually, the cemetery of Ukrainian artists and poets is situated in Russia, in the northern part of Russia, on the islands where the concentration camp stood once, where most of the Ukrainian artists and poets were taken. So all of this and many other things which are to be remembered, we write about it, we have discussions, we have conferences, and we have special projects, and we will have, especially now when the organization which was collecting the memories of Gulag in Russia, Memorial, is closed down in Russia according to the decision of the court.
Yes.
So we have to support this memory also, all the memory of the political repressions in the Soviet time.
And how is the situation of the Russian language in Ukraine? It's okay to speak in Russian. You also write in Russian, yes? It's not a problem in Ukraine also to speak Russian, or is a politically a big problem?
There is no problem to write, to speak, or to read. Russia is exporting to Ukraine millions of books legally. The books in Russian are to be bought everywhere. The Russian language is not taught in the schools, so the Russian schools don't exist anymore. There are only Ukrainian language schools. But if you speak Russian in the family and if you want to use it everywhere, you can use it. If you want to become a member of the parliament or civil servant, you have to pass exam of the Ukrainian language. You cannot be a state servant without knowing the state language. But of course, the Ukrainian language is coming back because, it was suppressed, it was limited in its use. And after 1991, Ukrainian society had very unusual problems because, for example, Ukrainian language did not have many scientific or medical terms because Ukrainian language was not used neither in medicine nor in science. So, now this phase is behind us. But half of Ukrainians speak Russian, and they are Russian speakers, but not necessarily Russian ethnic Russians. So this is part of the inheritance from the Soviet times. For somebody, it is part of nostalgia. For the others, it is still important cultural instrument because people who were brought up with the Russian culture. They will stay with Russian culture, but they should also know what is happening in Ukrainian culture. Russian classical literature is taught in Ukrainian schools as part of world literature. So Pushkin and Dostoevsky is in the schools, but they are not as a part of Russian literature, as a part of the world classical literature.
Yes, sure. And at contrary, in Crimea, it's the same with the Ukrainian language, or now with the Russian occupation, it's not possible in school to talk Ukrainian in Crimea.
Ukrainian schools in Crimea were closed down. There are no Ukrainian schools anymore. And there are no newspapers in Ukrainian. So Ukrainian is not welcome in Crimea. And I have a feeling it is actually banned in the Donetsk and Lugansk separatist republics. So, you know that there are millions of Ukrainians, ethnic Ukrainians, who live in Russia and work in Russia. And there is not a single Ukrainian school in Russia.
Yes, yes, this is the problem about the minorities, like always, but it's a little bit terrible in this situation. I have another question. I read that you, like Penn Center, as Penn Center Ukraine, were concerned about the situation of this newspaper Kyiv Post. It's a political problem, an economical problem. What is about this?
It's, I mean, instead of one newspaper, now we have two newspapers, which is maybe good. The people who worked for the old Kyiv Post, they were against the changes which were introduced by the new owner of the newspaper. And the new owner of the newspaper is a very rich businessman from Syria, not from Ukraine. So it is even more complicated than you think. And he wanted and still wants Kyiv Post to be published not only in English, but also to have a Ukrainian version, Russian language version maybe, and video and radio. So to make it into some kind of corporation. So the people who did not like this, they assumed that this reform is also connected with a very critical attitude of the old Kyiv Post towards Ukrainian politicians and Ukrainian government. So these people, they created a Kyiv Independent, a new edition, which is now published online, and I think they were planning to have a paper edition. And Kyiv Post, the old one, remained with the same title and employed other foreign journalists and foreign nationals and Ukrainian nationals to run this newspaper. This newspaper, Kyiv Post, is actually, I would say it is less critical regarding Ukrainian government, but it is more or less objective. And it is now, of course, concerned about the Russian-Ukrainian conflict and possible war. When the conflict is over, I hope without bloodshed, it will be easier to compare two Kyiv Posts, so Kyiv Independent with Kyiv Post, but I'm sure Kyiv Post will not become paid pro-government edition. I mean, it will remain independent, or if the owner will try to influence the policy of the newspaper, there will be another scandal, and maybe there will be 3 newspapers instead of 1.
Okay, yes. And what is your opinion about the evolution of the situation, not only of this terrible war menaces, but also in the society, in Ukrainian society, about the freedom of expression? Is there a support? Is there a good support of the Penn Center tries to preserve this freedom of expression by the people?
Well, I mean, we don't have banned topics, so I mean, you can have open discussions on anything. We don't have official censorship. There was always a bit of self-censorship on the side of the journalists if they wanted to work for one newspaper and this newspaper had specific policy, so they had to adhere to this policy. But journalists can find the newspaper to write for which corresponds to their likes or dislikes. Regarding political parties and political freedom, we have openly pro-Russian political parties also present in the government. They have their own media, they have their websites and their journalists. Of course, sometimes the television discussions between representatives of opposite political parties, they are very heated and very hot. But we don't have political prisoners in Ukraine because of the political views. And if this happens, then Ukrainian Penn Center will get involved at once. I mean, we are reacting very fast to everything what is happening in the society, and we are trying to be objective.
Yes, sure. This is very good. And about literature in Ukraine, the writers in Ukraine writes about the today, or they perhaps more writes about the past, or how is the situation with the writers in Ukraine? In this,
well, I mean,
dramatic situation at the end.
Yeah, the country is 30 years old, 30 anni. And of course, the literature is very young and most of the writers are very young. And until 2014, Ukrainian literature was not very politicized. It was more like books about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. But starting from the Orange Revolution and especially from Euromaidan and the beginning of the war in Donbass, the writers started writing more about political and social issues. And by today, we have more than 300 books about war in Donbass. What is interesting that we have approximately 400,000 Donbass war veterans, and many of them wrote their memoirs or diaries or books about their war experiences. So we have now a separate group of writers who participated in the war, and they continue to write about the war. And it's like two literatures coexisting at the same time. Professional literature of writers who wanted to become writers, and literature written by people who went to war and came back and became writers because of their own experience. So it is very interesting, and some of the books like this, they are now translated in many languages. I'm very happy to say that one book by a young writer who is not a war veteran and he didn't write about the war, Marchian Kamish, was published recently in Italian by Keller Editore. It's the book about Chernobyl zone. But there is a book now which is making a big impact on the readers abroad. It's a book written by Stanislav Aseev, who spent 2 years in Donetsk prison, in concentration camp in Donetsk. And this is a book about his experience in the prison and in the concentration camp and torture chambers of separatists. This book, which is called Isolation, it is published now in English, in German, in Polish, and I think the Italian edition is also coming soon.
Okay. Yes, Keller is a good publishing house. I know very well. Thank you, Mr. Kurkov. Have you a final address to our public of Hustling for Peace? You want to say from Kiev final address and some more words?
Yeah, I want to thank everybody who will watch this interview and who is thinking about Ukraine now. And please don't forget Ukraine when the danger is over, because Ukraine is part of Europe, and Ukrainian culture is part of European culture, and Ukrainian literature is part of European literature. And please take interest in Ukrainian culture, in Ukrainian literature, and in Ukrainian politics. And if you don't like something about Ukrainian politics, talk about this, write about this, and also send messages about this to Ukraine, also to Ukrainian Pen Center.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kurkov.
Thank you, grazie, mille grazie.
Grazie mille.